I was back in Scotland on Remembrance Sunday, and I decided to attend the service at Raf Dallachy, where there was a memorial for those who lost their lives in the war. After the service, I decided to walk through the old airfield, look at its history, and also discover more about Black Friday, 9th of February 1945, which became etched in both Norwegian and British Allied Air Force history. This is the story of the day.
Hooray! Hooray! Shoot!
The wreaths are laid by members of the RAF from nearby RAF Lossiemouth, a representative from the Royal Canadian Air Force, the Lord Lieutenant of Moray, the King's representative in the area, and various local associations and council. The memorial in my mind is not just a tribute to the 70 crew members who died, but also the 1900 air crew and the 400 WAF, Women's Auxiliary Air Force, who were stationed at Dallachy between 1943 and its closure in 1945. The granite plaques represent the four main squadrons that were based at Dallachy. 18 Group Coastal Command, from 404 Squadron, Royal Canadian Air Force, 144 Squadron, Royal Air Force, 455 Squadron, Royal Australian Air Force, and the 489 Squadron, Royal New Zealand Air Force, who lost their lives while based at Dallachy. After the service, and under a beautiful late autumn sky that seemed very pertinent, I walked through the old airfield to get a feel of the occasion and to both imagine the buzz of activity that must have occurred every day as planes took off and landed, were serviced, armed and refueled, and to remember the air crew that passed through the airbase, and especially the 70 air crew who never returned. There is little that remains today, although the layout from above is still very visible and the runway is still mostly intact and great for walking dogs. The only structure remains is the control tower, which has seen better days, but evokes images of controllers anxiously waiting for radio contact of returning aircraft, and the spotters eagerly counting the returnees. The hangars have long gone, but originally consisted of the quick-built blister hangar and the T2 more permanent hangar. Construction started in 1942 and was completed by the second half of 1943. Facilities were fairly rudimentary, and it was designed as a satellite airfield for the nearby RAF Banff. Dallachy started its operational career under 21 Group Flying Training Command as a satellite base for the 14 Pilot Advanced Flying Unit, which had arrived in RAF Banff in May 1943. Day and night flights were based at Dallachy for the training of pilots in multi-engine flying. They flew Oxford Mark II aircraft and also studied beam approach training with 152 unit of the RAF. In only 15 months, 644 pilots were trained and over 65,000 hours were flown from Dallachy. Dallachy was transferred to 18 Group Coastal Command on the 1st of September 1944. The first residents to arrive on the 29th of September was a detachment of Vickers Warwicks from 281 Air Sea Rescue Squadron and Fairey Swordfish of 838 Squadron Fleet Air Arm. After 106 uneventful dawn-to-dusk anti-submarine patrols, 838 left Dallachy on October the 22nd, followed 4 days later by 281 after 23 search and rescue missions had been undertaken. The 4 Beaufighter squadrons, for which Dallachy would become famous as part of the Strike Wing, didn't arrive until October 1944. The squadrons were equipped with Mark X Beaufighters in both the torpedo and the rocket version. The aircraft in the illustration was flown by Edwin Fitzherbert George Burrows of the Royal New Zealand Air Force 489 Shipbuster Squadron. He survived the war and was awarded the DFC. His pilot's logbook, which all pilots kept up to date, makes interesting reading from his time at Dallachy. They were joined 2 days later, and in order to locate and illuminate targets at night, a flight of Wellingtons from 254 Squadron equipped with the new Lee light and stickleback radar. Our story really starts when a reconnaissance patrol from the 489 Royal New Zealand Shipbuster Squadron sighted the German Narvik-class destroyer Z-33, accompanied by 2 flak ships and a minesweeper in Forder Fjord, north of Bergen. Close to the fjord, 5 German merchant vessels were spotted too. Normally the merchant vessels would have been rich pickings, but the Coastal Command had received instruction from the Admiralty that attacking naval vessels would be a priority. The Z-33 was located at the entrance to Forder Fjord, but well protected from both the mountainous fjord geography and by the accompanying flak and anti-aircraft vessels. The subsequent debrief of the New Zealand reconnaissance pilots reported that the destroyer in Forder Fjord and its accompanying vessels could not feasibly be attacked by more than 2 or 3 aircraft at the same time. It was obviously going to be a tough mission. The nearby Strike Wing base at RAF Banff was alerted, as was RAF Peterhead, the home of 65 Squadron flying Mustang Mark IIIs, who informed that they would act as escort. The group was made up of 31 Beaufighters, 9 from 144 RAF, 11 from 404 the Buffalo's Royal Canadian Air Force, 11 from 455 Royal Australian Air Force, 12 Mustangs from 65 Squadron Peterhead, 2 Vickers Warwicks from 279 Squadron that would act as air sea rescue, and also 2 further Beaufighters from 144 and 489 Royal New Zealand Air Force shipbusters to act as outriders. The large formation, numbering 43 planes in total, took off around 1400 hours, 2 p.m, and were led by Royal Australian Air Force 455 Wing Commander Colin Milson. His navigator, Flying Officer Ralph E. Jones, was the oldest member of the strike force at just 35 years of age. Almost immediately there was a problem. One of the P-51 Mustangs had to return to base in Peterhead near Aberdeen as a result of engine problems. At 15:40, that's 20 to 3, the formation reached the Norwegian coastline west of Sonjafjord. At this time the outriders started their search north and south, looking for other vessels or even the destroyer itself. It might just have been that the destroyer was heading in one of these directions, and if so the outriders would report back to the main force. The formation headed towards Fjordafjord from the south. The German fortress at Rnzaf fired a few rounds at the Allied aircraft without inflicting any damage. Milson led his planes over Bigstad, just south of the fjord. If the ships were still situated at Hellervang, at the fjord entrance, the plan would be to attack as they came out of the fjord and then head for the relative safety of the North Sea. The formation turned north, expecting to see the enemy at the entrance of the fjord, but then there was a nasty surprise. As the formations turned north, and with the intention of turning west back into the fjord and then make the attack out to sea, the group found themselves under flak and anti-aircraft fire from ships located directly below them. The Beaufighters had been spotted, and the flotilla quickly moved further up the fjord, which meant a conventional attack could no longer be undertaken. Z-33, the destroyer, placed itself at one side of the fjord near Rmzaf, and the three others stood in the middle of the fjord, probably to give their flak guns a wider arch of fire. These vessels included several converted trawlers used for anti-aircraft duties. Having been outmanoeuvred, Milson had little choice but to initiate another attack run. Because of the placement of the enemy vessels, the only way to attack was to fly through the fjord towards the sea, and then do a 180-degree turn and fly back up into the fjord. This was the exact opposite of standard attack procedure. Milson ordered the aircraft to form the Echelon Port formation so that they could be ready themselves to peel off for the impending attack on the ships. All this manoeuvring took time, and this was to prove deadly. Whilst the Luftwaffe had been severely depleted, they still had 12 ready aircraft located at the Hurdle base near Bergen, and at 15:50 the alarm sounded and the aircraft were scrambled. The unit based at Hurdle were not just the average Luftwaffe squadron, but Staffel 5 and Staffel 12, equipped with Focke-Wulf 190s and piloted by battle-hardened veterans of the recent Eastern Front in Russia. The 12 Luftwaffe planes took off quickly, and they were told en route that their mission was to intercept a large group of aircraft that was preparing to attack German vessels in the fjords. The pilots included Lieutenant Rudolf Lintz, flying his faithful Blue 4 FW-190 with close to 70 black victory bars on his white rudder, most of them victories taken in his time on the Eastern Front. Milson made the first attack. Behind him the others were queuing up waiting to make theirs. There was simply not room in the fjord for more than 2, maybe 3 Beaufighters to attack at the same time. Projectiles of all calibers were streaming towards the planes, and the flak was particularly heavy this day, as the ships had been placed with the intention of giving such effective cover. The German gun crew were also highly skilled in their profession after more than 5 years of war. The furious battle continued, with both sides taking hits and a number of Beaufighters being forced to make crash landings. At least 4 of the aircrew survived, and in all cases were taken as POWs. The Canadian 404 Squadron Unit of Flying Officer Savard and RAF Secondi Pilot Officer Middleton belly landed on the ice, but turned over and it trapped the crew. The Norwegians tried to help, but turned around as German soldiers fired at them. Middleton was severely wounded and died as he was being transported to land. Savard survived, only to spend the rest of the war as a German POW. A lone Mustang tried to help out and attacked the German fighter that in turn had attacked Savard and Middleton. The Mustang finally caught fire and made a wide turn out of the fjord. It was expected that he would make a crash landing, but no, the British pilot turned back. A long aerial duel developed. The pilot must have been badly wounded, but instead of bailing out, he continued to fight, but to no avail. The Mustang crashed in the green pine forest, being the only Mustang loss of the battle. Warrant Officer Cecil Claude Caesar was dead. The German fighter that had been hit by Caesar just before he crashed was also in trouble. The engine had been damaged, and this forced the pilot to bail out. A small charge dispensed with the canopy, and a small figure detached itself from the plane. He was too close to the ground to open his parachute, but fortunately the snowy hillside enabled the pilot to survive. A small subsequent avalanche carried him to the bottom of the valley. During this journey down, the flare gun accidentally went off, causing severe burns to one leg. This pilot was Heinz Zawalski. He spent the rest of the war in Hurdler, in hospital and convalescing, and saw no further combat. In 1994, he and his newly restored Weisse 1 FW-190 were reunited for the first time in 49 years at the American Heritage Museum in Hudson, Massachusetts. Further north in Naustdal, 3 fighters closely followed a damaged Beaufighter. The leading plane was a British Mustang, the other 2 were clearly Germans. The Mustang suddenly dived into the valley, only to emerge below one of the Focke-Wulfs and then fired a short, direct hit burst of fire. It was a certain kill as the Focke-Wulf quickly flicked over and spiraled down with black smoke trailing behind it, only to crash in a ball of flames near Solheimstollen. The occupant, Lieutenant Rudi Lintz, was probably killed before impact, as he made no attempt to evacuate the plane. At 28 years of age, he was one of the most successful German pilots in Norway at this time, and had already been credited with 70 victories, most of them against the Russians. The battle in all lasted only about 15 minutes. Thus about 4:30, 1630 time, the last combatants withdrew from the battle and set course for home. The remaining Beaufighters and Mustangs, many of which were damaged, flew singly or in small groups all the way back to Dallachy. Not only the planes had suffered. Aboard Beaufighter UBX of 455 Australian Squadron, Flying Officer Spink, the pilot, was severely wounded. The navigator, Flying Officer Clifford, had also suffered a wound in his arm, but he was able to assist his pilot. It did not help that the starboard engine had been damaged and was running out of control. At Dallachy, they made a wheels-up landing in the dark, quite remarkable in view of the damages on both men and machine. Both received the Distinguished Flying Cross for this considerable feat. Flying Officer Thompson from the Australian 455 Squadron also made a belly landing with his Beaufighter, registration UBQ, at Dallachy. Many of those that did manage to land in the normal method had shot up fuel tanks, missing parts of the control services, and other damages. At 18:45, that's 6:45, the last Beaufighter landed at Dallachy. As can be gathered from research and crew records, the Allied strike wings suffered terribly during this battle. 1 Mustang, 9 Beaufighters, and 4 FW-190s were shot down. No less than 6 out of the 11 404 Buffalo Squadron Beaufighters were shot down, and 11 out of the 14 Allied deaths were from 404. This included Pilot Officer Rex Myrick, whose brother John had been shot down over Denmark earlier in the war on a Halifax bomber, and Flying Officers Oswald Knight and Hugh Lynch, who were on their first operational mission with the squadron. Flying Officers Blackford and Mutimer from Australian 455 Squadron also lost their lives. In total, 5 aircrew were taken as prisoners of war. Flying Officer Savard from the Royal Canadian Air Force, as we discussed earlier, Warrant Officer Leslie MacDonald and Flying Officer Robert McCall from the Australian 455, and Pilot Officer Percival Smith and Flying Officer Frederick Spike Holly from 144 RAF Squadron. The Germans lost 9 men, 3 on board Z-33, the destroyer, 4 on board the anti-aircraft vessel VB-6808, and 2 pilots. 2 other pilots managed to parachute to safety. Both the downed German pilots, Rudi Linz, and a second pilot, Otto Liebfried, are buried in Bergen at the Solheim German War Cemetery. Black Friday was to have important consequences for the conduct of future shipping strikes. It was suggested to alter the target priority to prioritise submarine attack rather than surface warships, as had been the practice up until now. Tankers and troop transport were also to have high priority. But whatever the priority, the strike of 9th February 1945 was the last in which heavy attack planes were sent against the well-defended warships of the German Kriegsmarine. The recovered Allied bodies were initially buried in Fulda Lutheran Church, with a large crowd that gathered for the service. After the war, the coffins were transferred and laid to rest in the Haugesund Military Cemetery, where they remain to this day. Today, near Naustdal, there is a well-cared-for monument that honours and remembers the 14 Allied airmen that died. Even locally, there are reminders of the day. This seat is taken from Spink and Clifford's Beaufighter, crash-landed in Dallachy, and now forms part of the Dallachy exhibit in the nearby Fokkerber's Museum. As I left the airfield, I walked down another reminder of the importance of the Beaufighter to Dallachy. I walked the half a mile from the airfield to the Spey Bay Hall to attend the annual Remembrance Sunday tea. The hall itself has history with Dallachy. It was used by the Canadians and the Australians in particular to hold concert parties and for dances. It's always warming when the community gets together, be it veterans of the armed forces or the wider local public, the majority of whom will have had a family member who served their country during the war. And it's thanks to kind volunteers like Marjorie and Norma here who keep the legacy of remembrance alive. As I walked home in the fading light, I saw this single poppy in the hedgerow, and it was a clear reminder to me that Black Friday means more than just the Friday after Thanksgiving that gives us cheaper shopping.